This week in the field, a look at some of the themes that emerged during my recent San Diego Coastlines workshop. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In the Field. Thanks for joining me today. So I'm recording this the day after just finishing up a San Diego Coastlines workshop. Had 6 fantastic photographers in San Diego with me for 4 days. We spent a bunch of time down at the beach, had some great photos, and there were some themes that emerged. So I wanted to go through them and share some of what goes on in these workshops and some of the things that we learn. If you're interested in a workshop, I do have another one in San Diego coming up in September. Details are on my website. You can pop over there, see all about it. I'll still be here when you come back. But with that, let's get into a few themes that I noticed during this workshop. The first theme was composition challenges. Now, we went to a variety of different kinds of beaches, but the overarching thing was you get to a new location, you haven't experienced something like it before, or the conditions of the day maybe are not what you expected or what you hoped for. What do? How do you approach the scene? And so with the beach areas, there's a lot of things that can be going on. If you're on one of these rockier beaches, big stones, waves crashing on one side, there's surfers out in the water, what's going on in the sky, where do I point my camera, what do I do? And so a couple of the things that we did to help with our compositions is, number one, what's going on in the sky? If the sky is not incredibly interesting, then we need to minimize that. Conversely, if the sky is quite interesting, we want to put more of the sky in the scene. We had some weather challenges for the first couple of days. We had some pretty empty skies, so we pointed our cameras a little more downward. And then looking for what makes the scene interesting. I'm thinking in particular of the first night we went out. There was some pretty good surf, and it really started to get kind of high. Got several of us pretty wet, even though we were standing up on ledges of rocks. But watching for those waves, seeing a crash of one or a spill over a particular rock, and using that to anchor the photos. Another approach is getting a more intimate landscape. Some of the beaches we went to are quite empty. There's not a lot out there at first. And then when you look a little deeper, you start to notice, oh, well, the way the surf line comes up and down, that makes a line. Or the way that these groups of these pebble-sized rocks form and create their own sets of interesting patterns. Or just finding a handful that are circling in and around with the water and making their own interesting little dance and little scene there. So those are some of the compositional things that we worked on during the last 4 days. Another one was filter work. Definitely did some filter work. We were breaking out the 4-stop and the 10-stop NDs, figuring out how to calculate for what the right exposure is and capture either very, very smooth, silky water, going that big, heavy 10-stop, or the more fingers of water with those 4-stop NDs. Those are the 2 filters that come out of my bag most often, and worked with, I think everyone got some really nice, silky, smooth, fingers of water spilling over rocks. Some really great photos that came out of that. So main tips for when you're working with the filters is, number one, you need to meter the scene and set your focus before you put the filter on. When it's really bright out, you might be able to focus through the filter. Metering will start to be a little bit off. You can always take a shot and compensate for that. But I like to do that metering, get that focus set before the filter goes on, then put the filter on. You're either moving into manual mode if you're doing a long exposure, you're doing your calculation, then there's plenty of apps for our phones to do that kind of stuff, to figure out how long do I need to expose now that I'm cutting out 4 stops, 6 stops, 10 stops of light. And one other thought, when you're adding the polarizer in, your polarizer will also cut some number of stops of light. Ballpark tends to be about 2 stops, but it does depend on the polarizer. So that was another theme, a lot of good filter work, and the results were really, really nice. A third theme that emerged is I'll categorize as multi-frame photos. Now, the first one was panoramas. The Coronado Bridge it's a really, really beautiful bridge. I love it at blue hour before the sun comes up. And we got out there and captured some panos, making sure to level not only our cameras, but also our camera base. So when you do that sweep of your pano, you're going to have smaller amounts of shift and wobble between your panels and have to throw away less. If you've ever done a panorama and you have like an auto crop or the content, edge warp, I think they call it, or boundary warp in Lightroom, that's the white space around the edges of your pano. And the less you have there, that means the more usable data you're getting. Another one, though, is for capturing multiple photos of the same scene without moving your tripod, where you have different actions and elements happening at different times. And I'm thinking specifically of rocks. You've got water spilling over 3 different rocks. If you're really lucky, it all happens at the same time. If you're not as lucky, you set up, you park, you take several shots, and you watch each element of the scene, and you can blend those together later in post-processing. I have to say that we were pretty lucky, and there were several photos that came out where one shot was all we needed. We, this is what our last sunset outing. We got quite fortunate. There were plenty of rocks to work with, and they were all roughly about the same distances into the tide, and so we got several spills that just looked great across them. One other multi-frame photo that we talked about is focus stacking. Now, focus stacking at the ocean or any type of scene where there is mist and atmospherics in the distance doesn't make as much sense. But we went through the steps of what would be needed to do focus stacking, because there are those days where it is completely clear. You get right after a rain and the surf's calm, you can see the coastline for several miles, and doing a focus stacking is useful in those scenarios if you want that extreme depth. So multi-frame photos was another fun part of the workshop. Well, that's just a taste of the things that we covered during the workshop. A lot of more things in the classroom, had some great discussions, and of course, wonderful photography came from everyone in the group. I got to get my photos over from my laptop to the main machine here now, because there's several others that I want to dig into and process. And I think I'll take one of them and do it as a live edit for in post later this week. So come on back and check out that one. And if you've got questions about photography, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me through my website. Put the link below. I do have a workshop in San Diego, one more coming up in September. That'll be the last workshop in San Diego for the year. If you'd like to join me, some space left as I record this. Hope to see you out there. And until next time, my name's Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.